4-year? Right here. Take charge of your future at GHC. Apply now at highlands.edu.
Welcome to Community Watch, and today we're talking about the shortage of housing in Rome and Floyd County. Stay with us. Community Watch starts now.
To Community Watch. Greg.
Brother, how you doing, sir?
I'm okay. And you look very refreshed and comfortable, even though it's like 110 degrees this week.
Cool as a fan.
It's impressive. I'm always in amazement at you. But it's good to see you, and I'm glad you're doing okay.
You as well, brother.
Our guest today is City Commissioner Wendy Davis, who's been with us multiple times, and it's always great to see you. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you gentlemen again. I miss being in the studio with you, but I'm glad you've been able to adapt and keep your show in this Zoom format.
Well, I think, I don't know, I know that Jeff and Brian are kind of eager for us to get back in the studio. Greg and I haven't talked about it, but actually the Zoom has been beneficial in a lot of ways, because some of our guests would not have been able to be on the show if it were not for Zoom. So we are of mixed feelings about it. But today, at least, we're Zooming. And we have you on the show today in large part to talk about what seems to be a housing dilemma that's not brand new, but has certainly increased fairly recently. And has been such a concern that a committee was created. And you are on that committee. You are chairing that committee. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about the committee and why it was decided to create it.
Well, I'm happy for us to talk in more details about the nature of our lack of housing units, right? But to get, we'll dig into that later, right? The details of that. But because we have this lack of housing units, it's having a negative impact in a lot of ways, besides not having flexibility for people who want to change their current housing situation, right? People who had a starter home and want to move up as their family grows, or people who are trying to downsize, or new people who would like to join our community. Having fewer opportunities. There's an affordable housing problem all over America in an enormous way. And we have a piece of that too, but we actually have every layer of our housing stock underserviced, underavailable. And so we have over a year ago, we had a housing summit that was put together frankly, due to the economic development impact of not having housing units available. If somebody did decide this was the perfect place to bring their company, where would their higher ups who were moving here live, or even where would their workers live if they had to bring in more workers in addition to the workforce we currently have in our community? And so we've been talking about housing and trying to get people to think a little differently about it, understand the generational differences in housing. And so we put this committee together, frankly, to try to look, to examine the issue and to see what we might do as a city to get in partnership with folks and help jumpstart some housing starts, right? That would address any number of these elements of this issue. So I was actually given the prerogative to put together the committee, and I made sure that It had representatives from a broad section of our community. I was really proud of the fact that, unlike a lot of the citizens committees we put together, there are only 2 people who are older than me, right? Because very often I'm the youngest person in the group or next to the youngest person in the group in my mid-50s, right? So understanding that there are 2 generations of adults behind me in this community, and these younger generations have a different outlook about housing than a lot of us understand. So this committee has been looking at our landscape and assessing the problems, and we are hoping to come up with some incentives the city might be able to offer to get folks doing more building of both single family residences for people to buy, and also units for people to rent, and trying to think of creative things like people tend to call them tiny houses. I call them bungalows, right? A smaller square footage. Everybody doesn't need a big 3-2 with a 2-car garage, right? There are a lot of people who live more simply than that. And we don't have a lot of variety in our housing stock that we do have.
Well,
Wendy, I'm curious.
Mhm.
Walk me through the steps. So how does the actual development of new housing come about? Or is it just walk me through that step? Because it just dawned on me. I'm not, I really don't know how that happens. You see new constructions in different places, but it never really dawned on me, like, how does that start and who makes those decisions?
So, generally speaking, the traditional way is, somebody buys a piece of land or buys a big chunk of land, right? You think of people who are putting in subdivisions, which was sort of the classic way our community has expanded housing. We actually, in our community years ago, made the decision that, let's just say somebody was going to buy 20 acres and put in a new subdivision. We actually make that developer build all those streets, put in all the water and sewer, in addition to, getting each property, each individual piece of property ready to put their house on it, and then building their houses, right? And so they do all that investment, and then they hope to sell the house. And so that is why we have seen so many of the houses that had been built in the past 10 years. And frankly, there were about less than 1,100 houses built in the last 10 years. And typically a 10-year time period in our community had 3,000 or 4,000 houses being built in a 10-year period. So people haven't been, because the 08-09 downturn really crushed a lot of people who were in that business, right? But normally that person would take, that group or individual, whoever those investors were, right, would take all of that, shoulder all of that burden to build those houses. And that's why very often they have built larger houses, right? Because there's a higher profit margin available, the higher your home price. So they've been building bigger and bigger, right? So the price can go up, so they can, I'm not saying like make more money like in a negative way, but in a business way, right? If you build a smaller house at a smaller price, the margins are harder, if that makes sense. But that's part of what we've tried to turn people's thinking around to. There was sort of this traditional thinking that, well, everybody wants a 3-2. Well, if a 3-2 is all you're selling, yes, very clearly you're going to sell 3-2s. And I'm trying to convince people that that our market is hungry for a variety of options. And if the cheapest you can sell a 3-2 with a 2-car garage is $350,000, that prices most people in our community out of being able to buy that house. So one of the things we've tried to do is target smaller footprints, which can be built less expensively, so the sales price can be more affordable. But basically, it's all up to the builders, right? And so typically they would buy land or property that would be zoned for residential housing if they're building residential housing, but sometimes they do need to request zoning changes for a house to be there. Another thing we're really trying to encourage is infill housing, right? In a lot of our communities, there'll be a vacant lot, or there'll be a lot with a house that should be torn down, right? And so there's already the infrastructure there. There's already water and sewer there. They shouldn't, so that would reduce the, I think the word they use is sunk costs or land costs before you even start building the house. I felt like I kind of rambled there, but I think I ultimately got to your question, Greg, or are you still unclear?
No, that made perfect sense. I was just curious. So with that, so the committee that you're on, are y'all so your committee, exactly how does your committee intervene, or what role does your committee play in that?
So right now, our committee has spent, I think we've had 4 meetings, and we have worked really, I tried to be very deliberate about us starting with understanding the landscape, right? Where are we at in terms of, if somebody came into town right now and wanted to buy a house or wanted to rent someplace, where are we? And let's just talk about that a moment. If we, so even as recently as last year, there were typically 300 or maybe 400 houses on the market in Floyd County at a time. We are now down to about 100 houses for sale right now in Floyd County. The other day it was 107. And of those, less than 40 were between $100,000 and $300,000. Think about that a minute. That is not a lot. So there was a publication the other day that showed our 3 neighboring counties, and basically people are selling in 1 month more houses than are left on the market, if that makes sense, right? So it's a really tough time. And then I went and looked, we do have some traditional apartment complexes in Rome, but frankly, not a lot. And the ones that are the newer ones are full and have waiting lists. And I went to, there are a lot of companies that manage individuals' rental houses, right? So like one of the big realty companies, they manage 1,100 properties. And so at the beginning, it's like 2 months ago, I went and looked at the top 5 companies that manage the most rental units in town. And between all 5 of them, they had 10 units available.
Well, I guess that's good for if you're selling your home.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Because that allows you to sell at a premium price because of the demand.
Supply and demand does work that way. I have talked to a couple of people who were talking about how they wanted to sell their house and move to either a bigger house or a smaller house, right? Some people are growing their family and some people are downsizing. And I warned them all, do not put your house that you are sleeping in on the market until you have figured out that house you're going to move to. We are seeing houses sell. Particularly any house that's below $200,000, it's not even on the market a week. Sometimes it's on the market a day or 2, if that long. I heard about a house the other day that like 2 hours into the house being listed, they had like 5 offers. So it's, again, you could say, well, great, if you're selling houses, you're going to make more for your house. But again, that is not a normal market, right? And that's certainly not a market that's going to help us get housing that's more affordable.
We are coming up on a break, so please stay with us. We will be back with much more right after this.
For 50 years, Georgia Highlands College has been a community that takes charge. At GHC, we have a mission to provide access to an outstanding education, meeting the career needs of the region, and helping our communities thrive. Every student we graduate becomes a celebration we never forget. We are more than Chargers. We are Chargers taking charge for 50 years and beyond.
Welcome back to Community Watch, and we're having a conversation with Rome City Commissioner Wendy Davis about the housing, I hesitate to say crisis, but it's certainly tight out there. And the committee that you are chairing to try and deal with some of these issues.
So
Go ahead.
if I may, I'm going to continue to respond to the last question, which is sort of what is our role, right? So I had to start with defining the problem and making sure that we understood that it wasn't a problem for one part of town versus another part of town. This is a problem that touches every element of our community, both geographically, demographically, socioeconomically. There's not enough housing at any level. Public housing has 1,000-person waiting list for people to get into those housing units, and they're working hard to build more units and nicer units, and there's a lot of progress there, but there's a lot of people in need on that end of the housing spectrum. And then we've tried to focus a lot on the missing middle, as a lot of people are writing about, where if we recruit a new teacher to come teach at Rome High, maybe she just graduated from Spelman, if she wants to move up here, where is there for her to live, right? Matter of fact, the school system, I think, has made a relationship. City schools have made a relationship with one of the newly remodeled apartment complexes to go ahead and rent a couple of units so they can make sure their teachers have a place to stay, the new teachers that they've recruited. We have a similar problem with nurses, right? So this committee is looking at the problem. We are now looking to address potential ways we can incentivize folks to build some new units, again, both for sale and for rent. And we looked at the demographics of the median incomes in our community and looked at basically 65% of the people in Rome, sort of a little bit greater Rome, but definitely in the city of Rome, 65% make $50,000 or less, right? The actual median is like 38.5, but 65% of the people make $50,000 a year or less. So that's not a lot of money to spend for rental or mortgage opportunities. So we came up with a $250,000 sales price for a house or less, or a $1,200 a month or less, as our top end targets for new units that we would incentivize. In our next meeting, which will be in early June, we're going to talk about what kind of incentives those would be and start trying to figure out how the city might spur more development. We also have a county commissioner, Allison Waters, who's on the committee, and I'm hoping that she'll take a lot of those ideas to the county. Our committee has already made some recommendations about our zoning, because there's a lot about our zoning when it was implemented. I think we sort of took somebody else's plan and tweaked it to fit here, but that plan was a slow growth or no growth plan. And so there are a lot of elements of our building and zoning code that is intentionally not about density, right? Putting more units on less land. And so one of the things we've done, it's really ironic, out in the county, their residential zoning codes don't have a minimum lot size, but here in the city we do. And so one of our committee's recommendations was for the city to get rid of minimum lot size on residential in the city. So that's going through a process of going to the Planning Commission, and then it'll come to the City Commission. So you think about a lot of our older communities, right? They used to have very small houses on very small lots. And we are actually in a situation where if you bought one of those lots between two houses with our minimum lot size, you couldn't build a new house there. You actually couldn't build the old house back there because of our minimum lot size. So that's one of the things we're getting rid of. We also, we're proposing, the other proposal is changing some of the language. It was written that you might have heard an accessory dwelling unit, or like a granny pod, or you think of it as a garage apartment or an apartment in the backyard. Our code had that you couldn't put one in there that you rented or made money off of. And you couldn't actually build something else. You could attach it to your house, or you could attach it to your garage, but you couldn't put a new unit. So we are suggesting that we change some of that language to make that more possible. There are a lot of people who have single houses on really big lots, and they could put a smaller house, in their backyard that they could rent to a college student, right? Or if they wanted to downsize later, they could move to the little house and they could rent out the big house. So make those opportunities more possible. We changed a little bit about the language of cluster homes and townhomes. Again, the language is very limiting in terms of density. That's what you're finding in a lot of areas. People are, especially younger people, they're not worried about having a big yard, right? They want a place to live that's convenient to all the places they want to go to. And so, again, this committee's role is to make recommendations that would then go through the proper channels. In this case, when you're changing the zoning, it would go to the Planning Commission and then to the City Commission or County Commission, depending on if the county is interested in addressing any of these proposals.
Let me ask Wendy, because I'm still a little confused. I mean, I did hear you say that a significantly fewer number of houses have been built in the last, several years. But and I have not seen the census results for our area, but are there that many more people here?
So I think we haven't seen, no one's seen our specific county census numbers yet. They haven't been released, right? There is a very common perception that we haven't grown a lot. And now we're in a place where the lack of housing is going to prevent us from bringing new people in. So I think there are a couple of elements that contribute to our lack of housing that aren't the obvious, a bunch of people have moved in on us. And those are, our housing stock is really old, right? And so what 10 or 20 years ago was a house that when somebody moved out of it, you could move into, a lot of them are so old that people aren't making those investments to move in there, right? So it becomes one of those blighted houses that we have too many of, which means it falls out of our inventory of houses, if you will. I think the other thing is demographically, people are living differently than they used to. I know even back when I was in college, which to young people seems like a really long time ago, so many of my classmates all married, within a year or two of getting out of college, maybe 3 or 4 years, right? So, and now people are waiting much longer to get married. So if you think about that, I mean, even though there are a lot of people cohabitating, right? I mean, that's a cultural shift, but still there are a lot of people who many times those two people would have been in the same household and now they're in two different households, right? Also, the incidence of divorce does the same thing, right? A household that was one household, now is 2 rooftops. And so that's a part, those are all a part of how the problem develops, right?
I'll be interested to see the numbers on the census. And if it turns out that we are growing substantially, I mean, that's great. I guess and you can't question the housing issue. I mean, that's a measurable thing. So whatever the cause is, I mean, the housing problem is here. So.
And it is, we are in a really odd, chicken and egg kind of spot. People used to say that if you get the industry come, like I think it's in Jackson County where they have this battery factory that's coming and they're going to need 800 employees, right? Okay, so that comes, so all the builders swoop over there to take care of building those houses for those 800 employees. Well, most people nowadays aren't going to bring a place if there isn't the workforce there or the capacity for them to bring in their people quickly, right? And building a subdivision doesn't happen quickly. You can build a single family house, sort of one off fairly, somewhat quickly, but we also now are competing with this problem. We have a labor crunch and we have a lumber price skyrocketing. Like every actually piece of thing that you use now to build a house, all those prices are skyrocketing because of all the supply chain problems we had last year due to the pandemic. So that doesn't help us get prices down to where most of our neighbors can afford them, but that's part of the reason why we're also looking to incentives. So if we can help keep the cost of getting into the property lower, they can absorb some of those building costs and still keep prices in this sort of attainable range.
Well, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm curious because it seems like I've noticed a lot of construction as far as apartments and new places in the last 2 years. And so and not cheap, by the way. I mean, some nice, affordable, very price tags. And so Rome just has that kind of market now where the pricing, are we outpricing ourselves in some of this?
Yeah. We are. So when the group of folks led by Charlie Williams built those apartments by the Braves Stadium, right? Mm-hmm. And we gave them a TAD to do that because we expected a lot of development around the stadium and it hadn't materialized, right? So he put in those 124 units. And at the time I was like, $1,000 a month? Who's going to pay $1,000 a month? To me, that was a luxury price tag. And he built lovely units, but they were full before he finished building them. And he's maintained a waiting list for them. Similarly, the apartments you've probably seen on Turner McCall that were redeveloped, were renovated. They were full before he's finished the renovations. And maybe part of it is also we have, in some ways, a more transient workforce, right? We have a lot of doctors and nurses who are visiting doctors and nurses in our community who take up a lot of those units.
So now, is this a city problem or just countywide?
It's countywide. The lack is countywide. Again, there are very few traditional apartment complexes at all out in the county, right? But they have the single family housing problem out in the county too. And then the problem building in the county, if you wanted to build a new subdivision, is they don't have sewer out in the county, right? They have to build on a septic tank, which is a different set of prices. It complicates things because you have to have a certain size lot for a septic tank. It makes it harder to have density. So, but I'm very optimistic that a lot of people are thinking differently about what they want to build, thinking more like about building townhouses. And again, these smaller footprints and maybe leave off the garage, because the reality is to build a garage costs almost as much as it does to build another bedroom in the place. And so if you can cut out that expense, you can keep the price tag of the house lower. And what my goal is, me personally, right, is for us to be able to create make fertile land to draw young people back in particular. And so the density and in-town living is what young people want rather than, living out in the country.
Well, we're about out of time, but I certainly appreciate you joining us, Wendy, with information about this. So we'll be looking for developments, pun intended.
Always a pleasure.
All right. And thank you all for being with us on Community Watch. We'll see you next time.
Georgia Highlands College has got you covered. With more in-person, remote, and hybrid class options than ever before, you can take classes the way you want from virtually anywhere. Now's your chance to take charge at GHC. Apply now at highlands.edu.